All right, welcome to Painting Wellness. I'm Dr. Emerald, and
I'm Kat Garcia, and today we are going to talk about hard conversations and how to be heard. And this is part two of two parts that should be four. So, part three.
yeah, that makes sense to me too. So, in part two of the part three, we are going to be really discussing how to execute these skills.
It's part one of part three, guys. We're confused today. Yeah, so we're going to talk about executing skills to be heard.
Yeah, and also like having those conversations, and it is not a confrontation, which I have been practicing since the last time we were recording. So I've been kind of a fun little mantra, getting like making actionable steps for what we also discuss in my life. So.
Absolutely. So just really quick recap. We wanted to make sure that when we have conversations that we come from a place of listening to listen rather than to defend or to answer, and knowing that we might not be able to understand where the other person's coming from, but that we can understand that they get to have their own feelings, and that even though we don't understand them, they're still allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I use a lot when we're talking about being heard and helping people actually understand what listening is something called the feedback loop. And this is actually a technique. It's not called that by its real name. It's the listener speaker exercise, and Dr. Gottman and Gottman created this for couples, and it's really about the opportunity that I can be the speaker, you can be the listener, and you tell me what you heard, and I make sure that you actually heard me. And if not, you can get clarification, and then you get a chance to be the speaker. So I encourage people to, even at home, take notes. So you as the listener would take some notes, and when you're listening to listen, not to answer, after I give you information that is solely facts and my opinion or my perception, right, about what happened, then you can tell me what you heard, and you can even use some of the words that I said, and then you know I can be like, no, Emerald, like I didn't say that, right? So what do you think would be a big barrier, like if we were doing this activity and I told you and you still didn't hear me?
A big barrier as far as like me being able to hear and listen what you're saying, I would say like if I got defensive, or if I was having an emotional response in that sense that maybe my listening skills were decreasing, or maybe I wasn't here to play.
Okay. Yeah. And so that's why it's really important that the speaker actually comes from a place of I feel. We know those as I statements, and that I don't tell you what you did, but rather how I experienced it. So if I say, I felt really sad when, we decided that we weren't going to go because you wanted to go to the football game. Now, I'm not accusing you of anything, right? I'm stating a fact because you said that you wanted to go to the football game. So I can't say, like, when you selfishly said you're going to go to the football game, right? So I'm going to keep it to facts and what I said and what I felt. And so if I do it that way, it's going to be really hard for you to get defensive because I'm not accusing you of anything, right? I'm simply talking about what I feel and how I perceived it. And then it's really important because words matter. So the onus of delivery is always on us, right? And so I always say, when I'm delivering a message, I need to be clear. I need to be respectful, kind, and I need to use a tone that's going to be, it sounds authentic, not like I'm barking at you because I'm upset. So
that makes sense. And even in just like the small little example, when you said the word selfish, even though there wasn't actually a football game, I was like, well, I wasn't being selfish. Maybe so like even in these made up situations, it's amazing how those type of words do immediately still, or at least for me, put me on a defensive footing. And then also just like practicing. I would say that practicing something like this as a couple or is when in any situation outside of those arguments would be really helpful too, because it's a skill, it's
absolutely.
A muscle, right? Essentially.
Absolutely. And I think the more, when you listen to me and then you regurgitate what you hear me say, if it's important that I don't get upset that you didn't hear. This is an opportunity to learn how to clarify. And, I have to not be defensive. Like, you never listen, right? And just be able to, like, no, that's not quite what I said. And we do that until what you repeat to me is what I actually heard. Or I'm sorry, what you heard is what I said. And so it's really important. Then you get to speak your perception, and I get to be the listener, and you're not going to defend the points that I talked about. We're simply going to have you do the facts, do the I statements, and it's going to be your perception. Because, like we talked about last week, we're very individual, right? And so we can share a space and something that happened, and what I feel and view as happening is not what you view as what's happening or feel. And if I try to convince you of my experience, what's that called?
Gaslighting?
Gaslighting.
Yes.
So you see, so if I try to convince you of that my feelings are what you should be feeling, or my feelings are right and yours are wrong, I am then gaslighting you, and we don't want to do that because your reality and your feelings are valid.
So what I'm hearing is going back and forth workshopping this, even in the moment of it's not, like, you may not get it on the first try, but that's okay. And we're wanting to come from a place where our tone is authentic and that we're not getting defensive on either end of things, whether we're the speaker or the listener, and continuing to work through that until what you are saying is being heard and, I want to say regurgitated, but like said back, or called back to you.
And you said something really important right now, which is that our tone is really authentic. The amount of times that I have people say, well, but that tone, and we have to remember, and we'll talk more about this in the future, but it's important that we take people at face value. And so, ladies and gentlemen, when somebody asks us if we're okay and we say, yes, we're fine, then we are fine. It's the onus of saying, my feelings are hurt or I'm upset is on us. And so if you're trying to say something to me and, just repeat what I'm saying and you have a tone, then I can't read into the tone, but I can make an observation and we can talk about it. And again, it's a conversation. It doesn't have to be a confrontation.
In trying not to deviate too much, I'm just curious, like, how would you, if you are feeling, or if I'm feeling like you do have a tone that is making, right, I'm going to try to practice this, I am hearing and feeling like this is aggravating you based on the way that we're talking, or I don't know, I'm trying to like maybe dive in a little bit of like, if that tone is there, I'm perceiving that there's a tone, how, is there maybe like a quick little tip of how to talk to someone about that, or hey, I'm just feeling really scared, or like in a place where, can you come from a kinder place for me so that I'm able to have like this really important discussion with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we want to do is we all want to create a safe space. We talked about safe spaces to have conversations. We want to create a safe space for our friends or our partners or our colleagues to have safe conversations with us. So if we're feeling like there's a tone, it's going to be important that we say, hey, so, I mean, it sounds like maybe you're upset. Do you want to have this conversation later? Am I saying something that's upsetting you? And it's very interesting because you just went right into something else, which is people ask, when do we have these conversations? When do we talk about these things? I had a couple ask me, it was like, well, when things are really good, I don't want to stir the pot and start some shit. But when, so what do we do? And then when we're fighting, it's a fight, right? And so it's important to have these conversations not when we're fighting, because then it becomes part of the fight, not a conversation about solutions, right? And when it's calm, it's the perfect time to have these conversations because that's when we create that safe space. And it's not going to be perfect, you guys, because especially if we've been having a lot of arguments, that's going to be the tone, right? The attitude and all that. So it's going to take some practice, but I absolutely encourage people to have a notebook that they can write things in, and their partner have a notebook, and use the listener speaker or the feedback loop as something that they practice constantly. So it's, the more you practice, the better you do.
Yeah, I really like the writing it down. I think that can be a really useful thing. So like you're just making sure that those points that I'm perceiving that you're trying to make, I'm able to say, this is what I'm hearing, or read back. Is there some other things that you found could be helpful? Because sometimes I find, well, when I'm in school or in like a lecture type of a situation, I'm making notes. Sometimes I end up missing other points because I get so focused on the note taking. Or maybe I just that could be something that I'm friend, family, partner is like, hey, I'm gonna write this down, but is it okay maybe if you repeat some of these things? So because I really want to make sure that I'm hearing what you're saying.
Absolutely, and that's why we clarify at the end and we repeat, because if you miss something, then I can say, okay, but I made a very important point that I don't think you heard, right? Or you can say, you mentioned something about this. What did you mean? Or can you explain that to me again? Or because the idea is that we're creating a space where we can actually have a conversation, and it's not about either one of us being defensive or trying to blame shift, right? But rather just listen to where the other person's coming from and what they're feeling.
I like that, and coming together and hearing what they're feeling and they're wanting to say is, again, goes back to the beginning of our topic of it's a conversation, not a confrontation, because you're coming as together to work for a solution, or for both of you to come to a place that you understand each other. And I think that for me would be really helpful in keeping that mindset of, even if I am feeling different emotions, flustered or whatever, and taking a step back of like, wait a second, you're not an adversary. We're here because we're wanting to have this conversation so we can ideally build a stronger relationship from that.
Yeah, and it's always going to be you and your partner against the problem, not against each other. So when we can align that the goal is to resolve the problem rather than to shift blame, then we can say, okay, well, let's find a solution rather than who's responsible for this, because those are conversations that are in addition to, right? If there's somebody that's having a behavior that doesn't create a safe space for conversation, that is not the time to talk about that particular behavior unless that's going to be the conversation. Right now, the conversation is maybe about this event or this problem. And I think that it's important for us to make time to have those conversations one at a time. We don't want to overload our partners or our friends or whatever with like, this is what I felt. And by the way, you suck at talking and you suck at listening, and, you just whatever, and you're selfish because you picked the football game. And so we don't want to do that, because it really doesn't allow for the other person to feel safe because they're being attacked.
So there was this piece where I've certainly fallen into, maybe I'm going to call it a trap, of wanting to shift the conversations into different topics, especially if I'm feeling like I can't handle probably we'll say the pressure, the attention of something that I was creating, a feeling for my partner or friends, where then I'm wanting to, I'm like, well, you did this time, right? I can own that in this moment that I've done that.
The tit for tat, yeah.
But you said that, like, really focusing on one topic, and I guess immediately kind of what's coming into my mind is almost like I want to have like Kat, we're gonna have this conversation, so I'm gonna write like, this is the topic that we're. So for me, I can like always looking back, like, am I staying focused on this? But how does that help? What does that allow for when we're really focusing in on that one topic?
So it's normal for us to be sort of scorekeepers, and it's not helpful for the relationship. So we want to make sure that we allow our partner to express what their concerns are, and that we don't tack on our concern. We have opportunities to do that any other time, right? Because we want to avoid the tit for tat. Like, will you hurt my feelings too? And now it's taking off the attention of the original feelings being hurt. In our next session, we're going to talk about Dear Man, and that's a way of how to make sure that we're mindful throughout the topics and we stay on task. But we want to make sure that we're not kind of sabotaging our partner's conversation and taking over and making it about us. And that's why being a listener to listen is important, because I'm not going to interrupt you to prove a point. I'm simply going to listen and then repeat what you said to hear you, and not to say, but you did this, right? And then when I'm the speaker again and you're the listener, or vice versa, I'm not going to address the points you made. I'm simply going to talk about the event. So when we're going to do something like this, we want to make sure that we're picking an event that we're talking about, and we're both going to focus on that. So, we had an argument yesterday about going to the restaurant versus the football game. And this is, I want to talk about this. So we both know what we're talking about. And this also helps us not have this generalization of like, you always, or, right? It's like we're just talking about that event. So I know that we gathered a bunch of information right now, so I'm going to put you on the spot and let you be the hunter.
Perfect. So we're going to really get the key points on this from today's little discussion, and the pieces that we're wanting to do when we're having a conversation is to make sure, we'll go kind of backwards, is pick a topic. So bring it to the table. Say, hey, this is what I would like to discuss. This particular event, making sure it's not a generalization. It is a specific time and place that we're able to focus on. And then when we are elaborating or discussing these things, we want to communicate as clearly as possible with our partner, creating a friendly, I want to say friendly environment, safe environment. Be that with our body language, our tone, and the situation. So we want to make sure that this isn't when the boat is already taking on water that we're now deciding that we're going to have this conversation. And as the listener, being able to either repeat back what you heard. You can also write down the different key points that you heard, and if you need to ask your partner, friend, whoever you're speaking with, hey, would you mind repeating those things, because I want to make sure that I'm hearing what you're saying. And then for the speaker to then either say, yes, this is what I am saying, or refining. I would say well, what I'm really feeling or what I'm wanting to say is this, and going back and forth until we've come to a place that you feel heard and I feel like I understand, or at least have heard the feelings that you're experiencing. I don't necessarily have to understand why, but I can hear that this has affected you in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next series, or part 4 of 4, is going to be about how to stay on topic, how to be mindful in conversations in order to be heard. So thanks for joining Painting Wellness.
Next time. See you then.